Cully Stimson is joining us from the Heritage Foundation, national security and homeland security expert as well. Again, for the Heritage Foundation. Cully, always great to have you on. So much going on the southern border. So let me just get right to the questions because a lot of folks are debating this. Does Texas have a legal right to effectively ignore the Supreme Court? Now, I know people are interpreting what happened at the Supreme Court differently. He says that he does under Article 1, Section 10, where he says that no state shall engage in war unless that state is being invaded. Does it all come down to those three words, unless they're being invaded, which is four, but do you agree with that?
It doesn't come down to those three words. And in fact, there's a lot of idiocy out there about what the Supreme Court did in their two-sentence order. It was not a decision on the merits of Texas's claim against the federal government. It simply kicked the case back down to the lower court so they can adjudicate the issues and develop the record. So nothing in the Supreme Court's order prevents Texas from continuing to place barbed wire or other barriers, for that matter, along state and private property, which is what they've been doing. At the same time, while the case is developing, there's nothing preventing the federal government from tearing down that, except, of course, if Texas is going to push back. So I know it's frustrating because it wasn't an opinion that says this is prohibited or this is allowed, but this is what the two sentences mean and nothing more. But look, none of this, honestly, would even be happening if the Biden administration wasn't refusing to enforce federal immigration law in the first place. And Texas wouldn't be enforced to install the border barrier, take control of the city and private property where illegals are crossing into the border. So this is all on the Biden administration. And I think the optics here, Dan, are horrible for the Biden administration. They're ordering their Customs and Border Patrol agents, who probably are very much akin to the law enforcement folks in Texas, to tear down wires. And here's what the district court judge found in his order. He found that, let me get the language, that the wire was so successful that illegal border crossings dropped to less than a third of their previous levels, unquote. This is a judge who found that on the record. So the Biden administration is in, I think, dicey water doing this, and the optics are horrible.
Well, the optics are horrible, and I think that the fact that you've got Greg Abbott and 25 or so other states that are siding with the Texas governor, I think it does really look bad for the president, especially when you look at the video of people just streaming across our southern border. And you're right about the interpretation of the Supreme Court, where they basically did say that, Biden can take it down and Texas can put it back up. He was doing an interview on Fox News where, he said as such. And so I guess now the question is, where does this whole thing go from here? I mean, what's the next sort of legal maneuvering?
Yeah. So, the old saying, past is prologue. Remember, during the Obama-Biden administration, they sued the state of Arizona to prevent Arizona from putting into law certain state laws that were passed. And there were two cases, Chamber of Commerce against Whiting and Arizona against the United States. But the core holding of those upheld the state's right to enact laws that didn't preempt federal law, but helped the federal government in the enforcement of federal immigration law. And I think here, to answer your question, this will be litigated. The facts will be developed further at the district court level. The district court judge's ruling was all on Texas's side. And then the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, which is the next court up, the appellate court between the trial court and the Supreme Court, will then have a fuller factual record to develop and then rule on. And then ultimately the loser likely could petition the Supreme Court for certiorari so that the Supreme Court takes it up. So I think sooner or later, this issue is going to come back to the Supreme Court and it'll be resolved on the merits. But it's going to take a little while.
Do you? I mean, I don't know if you're allowed to answer this question, but when you look at the merits, I mean, I'm no lawyer, trust me, but when you look at the merits, I see that Texas has a right to defend its state against this invasion. Do you, knowing the makeup of the court now, do you have any predictions as to what may happen?
Well, I will say this, that, you know, the invocation of the invasion clause is a novel claim. The easier path, I think now, is for the Supreme Court to relook at Arizona against United States. It was egregiously wrong. The makeup of the court has changed. I think that the majority of the court now, if they took up Arizona versus United States, in the main would reverse that and uphold the ability of states to enforce federal immigration law, including actions like what Texas is taking now. And so instead of going down the novel, untested route of ruling on the invasion clause, I think they could just reverse Arizona against the United States and expand on their language in that in Chamber of Commerce versus Whiting, which was the two cases against Arizona that the Biden administration, the Obama-Biden administration fought the states. It's so weird, though. Think about it. The federal government is suing a state for trying to do what the federal government refuses to do. So Texas is defending New York and Chicago and all these other places who are complaining about illegal immigrants because the Biden administration wants their Border Patrol agents to tear down the walls so that more illegals can come in.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
It's crazy. Let me ask you, Cully Stimson is joining us, national security and homeland security expert for the Heritage Foundation. More than 24 other states, as we've discussed, have sided with Texas on this issue. Aside from putting out statements, what does that actually mean judicially, legally? I mean, I understand the impact of those statements, and I appreciate that, but what's the impact of that in the real world?
Well, in the real world, in the battle for hearts and minds and public opinion, it probably does say something. Remember, though, in Supreme Court cases, in particular, in recent cases like Miller versus Alabama and some of the other issues, some of the other cases related to whether juveniles, people under 18, can get life without parole sentences, parties on both sides noted in their pleadings before the court that sentencing heinous murderers, rapists to life without parole who happened to be under 18 when they did it, 17 and 16-year-olds, was falling out of favor within the states, and fewer states were allowing that. So that may come into play in the sense that these states are weighing in the litigation down the road. I don't know. I think it's more of a sense of what the American people are saying, as evidenced by what the 25 governors who have now sided with Texas, and by the way, Heritage sides with Texas on what they're doing, because obviously the Biden administration wants open borders. They're getting it. And just think of this fact. During the previous administration, 11 people who were on the terrorist watch list were caught crossing the border. During the Biden administration, 300.
Cully Stimson is joining us, a national security and homeland security expert for the Heritage Foundation, talking about the border debacle. Now, you do have these Democrats that are saying that President Biden needs to take over the Texas National Guard. This happened once before, I guess, way back in 1957, because the National Guard, I mean, they put out a statement and actually said that they side with the state of Texas. So they're in a really precarious position right now because they're kind of stuck in the middle. What do you make of all that?
So remember that every state militia, which is euphemistically called a National Guard, it's actually a state guard, reports to the commander-in-chief of their state, who is the governor. So every governor has a state guard, which is called the National Guard, working for them. There are federal statutes that allow the President of the United States to federalize National Guards in the time of national emergency. But if you look at the relevant statutes, some of them say that the president has to ask permission of, and the governor has to consent to, the federalizing of the state National Guard. Now, if the president wants to send them overseas, it doesn't matter whether the governor consents or not. And so it would be very interesting if Beto O'Rourke, that constitutional genius, and others who were calling for this got their way, and Biden ordered the Texas National Guard to stand down, and Governor Abbott said, you can ignore that order because I'm your commander-in-chief. So that would be a real pickle. And I think if I was a National Guardsman, I'd be following my governor because he's in the direct chain of command.
Well, that's the sticky wicket. I mean, you've got the Border Patrol. I mean, they're not happy with President Biden either. The National Guard isn't happy with the president either, of course. And you've got all of these other states that are standing by President Biden. We've got 10,700 National Guardsmen here in the state of Tennessee.
Yeah.
I mean, what would happen if governors started sending their own National Guard to Texas to aid there? I mean, would you call this a serious national a constitutional crisis?
Completely avoidable if Biden just did his job and enforced federal immigration law. Remember, other states, because their governors have activated them, have sent their National Guard, their state guards, to Texas.
Yeah, we have too. We've got like 125, 130 out there.
Right. And so they know because we live in a republic and the states tend to help each other. They also compete against each other for jobs and taxes and things like that. That there's a problem in the border. And so, I mean, look, it's almost as if Biden wants Trump to win, because Trump won in part last time because he said we got to fix the border. And now Biden is doing everything he can to turn Customs and Border Patrol agents into Walmart greeters. Welcome to America. Here's your paperwork. Here's your court hearing 10 years from now. Here's a ticket. Where do you want to go? And I hope, by the way, here's a phone. Welcome to America. It's absurd. And I think that, the courts are not designed to solve public policy tough issues. Congress needs to do its job, but essentially here, there are laws on the books that if the executive, whose job is to faithfully execute the laws, did his job like the last administration did, this wouldn't even be an issue at all.
And we'll leave it there. Cully Stimson from the Heritage Foundation, as always, appreciate your analysis. Great analysis, and we'll look forward to speaking to you again. 7:50 on Nashville's Morning News.